Hi, hello, welcome to my review of this new Amazon Prime Video series, The Continental from the world of John Wick. As the title already says, it's a series that is based on the world of John Wick. It's the second thing from the John Wick universe that came out in 2023 after John Wick Chapter 4, which should be the ending of the series, but I guess there's another part coming out. For the people who've been living under a rock, the John Wick series is a very popular series of action films that came out since 2014, and they are based on the popular Fortnite skin that came out in the Season 3 Battle Pass of Fortnite. It's a series that really stands out in front of other action series because of its great main character, its amazing world building, and also its really creative and realistic and just nerve-wracking action. And especially the world building is what the Continental is based on, basically, because the John Wick series set up this whole universe of assassins and this whole crime universe of people who are like really skilled assassins. And the Continental is an international chain of hotels, basically, and every assassin of this organization can be in this hotel and can be safe there. And the series, The Continental, is based on this hotel and how Winston Scott, the hotel manager in the John Wick series, got to be the manager of the hotel that we see in the John Wick series. He's the only main character from the John Wick movies to appear in the show as well, next to Sharon, who was played by Lance Reddick, rest in peace. So one worry that I had with this series was the fact that it could be just like John Wick and that it tries to copy a lot from John Wick, but it definitely doesn't try to do that. Yes, it has the universe of John Wick, a few characters from John Wick, and it's also a revenge story, but it's much more different because it tries to show the viewers a lot of different perspectives that people have on this world of assassins. For example, there is the storyline of Michelle Pradas, who plays basically an outsider. Then there's also two siblings played by, I'm really fucking sorry, Hubert Point du Jour and Jessica Alain, and they play two siblings that basically have this dojo, and this dojo apparently has some kind of connections with this criminal underworld. And then there's also Colin Woodell playing Winston Scott and Ben Robson playing Frankie, his big brother. And that's basically the main storyline that this is about. It's about Frankie, who has stolen a coin press, and this is basically the MacGuffin of the series. But it's more just about this connection that they have with this criminal underworld, with the coin press being just there as well. And when Frankie disappears, the manager, played by Mel Gibson of the Continental, forces Winston Scott to find his brother again and get this coin press, because this is apparently very important. So yeah, that's basically what this show is about. It's a 3-part long miniseries with every episode being about 1.5 hours long. And yeah, I really disliked it, to be honest. But first of all, some positives, I guess. The action in episode 1 and episode 2 is really good. It felt like John Wick. It felt like this very intense hand-to-hand combat that we are used to. There is only a few action sequences in both of these episodes, which I don't have anything against. Again, the series tries to be a little bit different from the John Wick series, and it makes sense that they would try to build up a lot more character and not just concentrate on the action sequences. That's one thing they changed up about this. And definitely in episode 1 and 2, the action is really good and really intense. And the best thing about these episodes, definitely, because when everything was uninteresting or bad, I was at least entertained with these action sequences. I also kind of like the idea of Michelle Pradas' character's perspective. Again, this outsider looking into this world and like kind of finding out what is about, really. I will get to why I didn't really enjoy it anyway, even though the idea is kind of cool. And Peter Green played a very charming old guy who kind of flirts with this old woman that he takes captive. It's basically the Stockholm Syndrome storyline, but in a fun way. I don't know. I just enjoyed his character, kind of. And that's actually it with positives. I really did not enjoy this series that much. So here's the problem I have with this series mainly. John Wick is really great for 3 reasons, okay? First reason is, again, the main character of John Wick. Second is the world building, and third is the great action. I really enjoy the first part and the second part because they are very grounded and not that over the top. The action gets a little bit more ridiculous in part 3, but part 3 is still pretty great because it's still kind of ridiculous but much more creative. And in part 4 it gets kind of ridiculous to the point where I didn't enjoy it as much anymore. That's why part 4 is definitely my least favorite part, because everything that I concentrate on mostly is John Wick. If the action isn't as great, because I'm really not that interested in the world building. It's just kind of an extra on top of great action and a great character. So that's what I like about the John Wick series. And the Continental has these 3 things as well, in a way. It also has a main character who wants to take revenge on someone for doing something. It also has some action, and it also has this world building of John Wick. But again, because I'm not really interested in the world building, I have to concentrate on the characters and the action much more. In part 1 and 2, the action is good, but I really didn't care about the characters at all, or basically anything. So the first 2 episodes really had only a very few scenes that I really cared about. It was very split up. There was again this plot of the main brothers. They didn't really have a good bond that made me care for their relationship, and the crime press was just a MacGuffin anyway, so I didn't care about that either. So that storyline was already not that interesting. Cody's story was basically pretty useless until episode 3. Again, this outsider perspective was kind of interesting, but they didn't really do a lot with it. And then there was this dojo story with the two siblings as well, which just didn't fit at all. Their characters kind of fit into this crew. That was kind of fine, but their whole storyline with the dojo it felt so completely different from everything that we were focusing on, because we were focusing on mostly the story of taking revenge, and then this just kind of happened as well. And then the hotel view was fine, I guess. Again, we had this view of the manager played by Mel Gibson and Sharon, and they had some interesting scenes, I guess, in the first 2 parts, but that's not really enough for me to make this really interesting. And then there was this generally just fake feeling about the first 2 episodes. I couldn't really explain it directly. It's just the lighting and the whole atmosphere just felt kind of artificial. The soundtrack had a lot of very popular songs from that time, I guess, but it just didn't really fit the vibe of the show, to be honest, or the tone. Especially Roundabout by S, which is this To Be Continued song. This song was actually used in a scene, and I could not think about anything else than the To Be Continued meme, which it should be illegal to use this song in a serious way. And then episode 3 was just kind of a disaster. The episode is much more focused on action, and it's kind of structured as a heist movie because they are breaking into the hotel and they are trying to achieve a very specific goal. And so I guess the structure could have worked pretty well. For example, Ocean's 11, Ocean's 12, and Ocean's 13. All of these 3 movies, even though I wasn't always invested in all of them, I still kind of always wanted to know what was happening next because of this heist structure that they had. But just a lot of things about this episode were just very off, or also just like very cliche, predictable, and so by the numbers, even though it was a unique story that I haven't seen it done in that way exactly. There were some misleading deaths, there was some very weird CGI that it wasn't too distracting, but just seeing CGI sometimes in fights just makes me believe it much less than I could. Also, the fights in general were just kind of goofy. With fights like John Wick, I really believe most of them. They turned to be much more creative and versatile, fighting with swords or books or anything, but it was mostly still believable. Like there weren't a lot of fights in the John Wick series where I genuinely didn't believe that they did what they did. This time around, I really didn't believe it. And genuinely, they tried to make these fights much more creative, much more ridiculous, but not with actually good techniques. They cut them a lot more, and they had weird aspects about them, used a lot more CGI, or much more noticeable CGI at least. Then they also had some very goofy characters, like for example the twins, which were just so weird. Some of the moments that these twins had are so unrealistic. I just don't believe that these people actually exist in this universe. When John Wick got weird, it just got kind of weird, but it was still believable. Like the most unrealistic thing that I remember about a specific person in the John Wick universe was this very fat guy in part 4 who survived a lot of shots to the body without flinching. And the same thing also happens in this series. There's a very big guy, a very big muscular guy, but he isn't very fat. So I don't believe that he would take bullets like nothing. It just doesn't work like that. And again, the twins, they do some very weird shit that just looks so stupid. They take so much time, and I just don't believe that they haven't been killed much earlier in the series or genuinely in their lives if they move so slowly. And there was a very weird scene where one of the twins was acting like a spider. It's just goofy for goofy's sake. I don't know what was the thought process of making a villain like this. I just don't believe that this is a real person. And all these little things just kind of add up to me being so much less interested in this episode than I could have been. Because at the beginning, I was kind of starting to get some interest in the story because I was interested in what the conclusion of the story could have been. But with all these things, I just was interested. Also, there wasn't the greatest acting. It has this very goofy tone all of a sudden that just doesn't fit the series at all, at least not the first 2 episodes. They seemed like they were on purpose, but it just seems like bad acting because that's not the tone of the series before the 3rd episode. There was also a kid who he just seemed bored. He wasn't really that emotional, and he had one liner at the end that just kind of ruined it for me. And Mel Gibson actually is also not that great. Again, very over the top. Doesn't really work for me. I don't know what they did with him, but it just made me take him seriously much less over the course of this episode. So even though the one thing that I mostly enjoyed about the series was much more present in the 3rd episode, it was also much more inconsistent and made me enjoy it even less. So yeah, this is a 3-part series, not that long of a commitment to be honest, and I had the feeling that much more people than me would enjoy this series. Not because they have a bad taste or anything, but I just think that this story wasn't for me. The story itself didn't do a whole lot wrong until the third episode, but I just had a genuine lack of interest after already 20 minutes of watching. So maybe it just wasn't for me. I'll give the Continental a 3 out of 10. I can still kind of recommend it. I can definitely recommend it if you're a John Wick fan. I can recommend it if you're an action fan. The first 2 episodes had some kind of good things about them. The third episode was kind of a mess. And therefore I leave this very disappointed. So thank you for watching and see you guys next time.